الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ألهمنا مراشد أمورنا وأعذنا من شرور أنفسنا. The surah after surah An-Naml, in which the lesson was taken of how a person becomes blinded by the apparent beauty of this world, and in only looking at that which is zahir, the mind and the eye of a person, if it does not have a guide, fails to see the hidden qudrat which is behind. It is called al-inkhida' bil-zahir or al-inkhida' bil-madiyya, that a man falls into deception because of materialism. In Surah Naml, Allah Tabarak Ta'ala showed the farq between Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, whose eye was on the qudrat of Almighty Allah. When Bilqis sent wealth for him, then that was not the maqsad and purpose of his life. And the difference between a woman who has been given the best of this world, but if she did not have deen, then she would have lost out completely. In the surah before that, it was Surah Shu'ara, where indication was made to how a world of entertainment will take someone very far from the haqq. And the surah before that was Surah Al-Furqan, where Allah Tabarak Ta'ala spoke about the Quran, how it will take a person and draw him closer and closer towards his paradise, everlasting success. So this muqabala between haqq and batil, whether it is Quran on the one side, which is the absolute truth, and whether it is the shi'r, shu'ara, the agents of the devil who paint the beautiful pictures, which are nothing but lies, but in such a manner that they paint it that it settles on the minds and the hearts of people. The muqabala between madiyat, which Bilqis was blessed with, and between ruhaniyat, which was the hissa of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam. In the next surah, Surah Al-Qasas, Almighty Allah gives that qissa, that incident, which is in the minds of practically every Muslim. It has been repeated in the Quran so many times. Somewhere along the line in a person's youth, he would have heard about Musa alayhi salam and Firaun. In Surah Al-Qasas, Almighty Allah traces from the beginning of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam's life. The surah could be also known as a surah of tasalli. It was at the time when Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had to leave Makkah Mukarramah because of the oppression of the Quraysh. Due to them being blinded from the truth and not stopping in their persecution, the Muslims had already gone over to Medina Munawwara. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is now going to make the journey. On the outskirts of Makkah Mukarramah, he turns around. He looks at the Kaaba with a very heavy heart. And he says, had my nation not forced me to leave you, O house of Allah, I would never have left this blessed land. For the purpose of tasalli, Almighty Allah was going to reveal the surah. Jibreel alayhi salam would bring it at that time. In the surah was the mention of how Musa alayhi salatu wasalam once upon a time also had to run away from the land. He had to run away from the lands of Egypt in the fear that if he had to stay any longer, he would be killed. In it is the mention of when Musa alayhi salam was born and his mother had to put him in the water, in the fear that if she keeps him with her, he will be killed. Almighty Allah promised the mother of Musa alayhi salam, put your child in the water and trust Allah, and we will bring your child back to you. Whoever knows the incident, as we will read now, will see how the promise of Almighty Allah was fulfilled. In what a unique manner Almighty Allah brought Musa alayhi salam back to the mother. How protected, with what afiyat, what izzat. It became like a laughing matter against the army of Firaun. And then came the time when Musa alayhi salam was a prince in the palace of Firaun, and he killed a Qibti, one of the people, the locals, one of the men of Firaun, which was regarded as a major crime, like how in the land of Palestine today, if an Israeli has to be killed, one Israeli will make the whole world go up in roar. But if 100 Palestinians are killed, it will make no difference. In that manner, they would butcher the Bani Israel. They would kill children who were ma'soom, innocent, but they had no voice. It was not called a crime. One error that Musa alayhi salam committed, he did not even intend to kill the Qibti. It was just a punch. But that was the major crime. For that a parliament was called. An i'timar had to take place. What a gathering had to take place. Without even calling him into the court. Without even hearing his side of the story. Decision was passed that he has to be killed. Musa alayhi salatu wassalam had to run out in the fear of his life. But we all know how Allah Tabarak Ta'ala, when He sent Musa alayhi salam back, when he comes into the court of Firaun many years later, and Firaun will say, are you not that very person who once upon a time killed a man from amongst us? Musa alayhi salam went with fear, but when he came back, he came to create fear in the hearts of Firaun and the court of Firaun. With his mighty stick, with the miracles Allah had given him, how he walked into. At the end of the surah, Almighty Allah then revealed that verse, which was the tasalli to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was going to be a tasalli to this ummah also, that there will always be times when this ummah will find itself. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam described Islam like a bucket. There will be times when it will be up, there will be times that it will be down. But every time that it seems Islam is collapsing or the Muslim world is collapsing, it is like how Musa alayhi salam was being sent into the waters. At times he comes right into the jaws of the enemy, right into the jaw. Or it's like how Musa alayhi salam had to run for his life. He had to flee from Egypt to Madyan. No one at that time would have understood that one day this Musa, who today is all alone without any food, will return as a mighty warrior, alone to challenge the mighty court of Firaun. On that day he was running away from a few policemen. A day was going to come when he was going to walk happily into the court of Firaun in front of the entire army, and he would have no fear. So the end of the surah comes with the verse, إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنِ, indeed that Allah who sent the Quran to you, لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ, He will definitely return you to the place that He has promised. For Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first promise was that you will come back to Makkah Mukarramah. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam within a few years would enter as the conqueror of Makkah Mukarramah, but it would not stop there. It would be the conqueror of the world. Islam was promised very high places. Whenever Islam or the Muslims collapsed from that position, it was the promise of Almighty Allah, we will return you back to that position again. When the Crusades came, the world did not feel that this ever will be destroyed. There was not a place in the lands of Al-Aqsa except that the masajid were made into stables. No one was making sajda in the houses of Almighty Allah. 4 kingdoms of the Christians were established. No one would have ever thought the name of Allah will be taken again in this land. Within 100 years and the entire thing changed. Almighty Allah's promise that Allah who sent the Quran, He will return you to the position He has promised you. When the Tatars invade the Muslim lands, and the city of Baghdad, which was the capital of the entire world, when they left the city of Baghdad in ruins, when the scholars were killed in the thousands, no one would have ever thought that Islam will reach, but it was a promise of Almighty Allah. They were going to see the rise of the mighty Ottoman Empire. In recent history, when the Khilafat of the Muslims fell, and the entire Turkey changed its color, from a city of Islam, Istanbul, it became a city of Kufr. When the lands of Syria, Jordan, and surrounding areas all fell into deep atheism, no one would have ever believed that the day will come when it will rise again. But as Allah Tabarak Ta'ala would bring Musa alayhi salatu wasalam back, one individual without any fear, as Allah Tabarak Ta'ala brought Musa alayhi salam back to his mother in such a unique condition that the enemy could not harm him at all. Almighty Allah has promised that Allah who revealed for you the Quran is going to return you definitely to that position that has been promised. This is the lesson that is taken in Surah Al-Qasas. Allah Tabarak Ta'ala starts the surah, نَتْلُو عَلَيْكَ مِن نَبَإِ مُوسَى وَفِرْعَوْنَ بِالْحَقِّ. We will relate to you the incident of Musa and Fir'aun, Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun the accursed. إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ عَلَى فِي الْأَرْضِ. Fir'aun was a zalim of the time. This word عَلَى فِي الْأَرْضِ is used for Fir'aun. Almighty Allah would also describe the day that the Jews in the lands of Al-Aqsa would become great oppressors, which most likely is today. That word Allah is used also for them. So how Fir'aun was to the Bani Israel, today we find the Jews are to the Muslims of Palestine, to the Muslims of the world. Inna Fir'auna ala fil ardi. Indeed, Fir'aun stood high in the earth, meaning he was that no one could lift his voice against him. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. He ensured that the people would never unite. He made groups amongst them. Groups amongst them, one meaning is, each group despised the other. Each group was fighting with the other. As long as people on the ground fight with each other, there is never a hope of them uniting to fight against the bigger power. It was always the demand of the temperament of Islam that for a mightier and a bigger purpose, minor differences should be forgotten, overlooked. Ways should be looked at of trying to sort the problem out, but without breaking the unity. The enemy of Islam, whenever they wanted to establish their hold against the Muslim world, at times even in the guise of a religious issue, they would bring the people fighting about something which is not really minor. In Islam, everything is major. But in light of something more important, in light of this kufr which is ghalib over the Muslim world, a person would become blinded to that kufr. He would be happy to remain under a regime of kufr. At one time he would be happy to work under the Mongols, under the Tatars, under the Christians. They would be ready to side with non-Muslims just because of the ikhtilaf amongst Muslims themselves. Right in the beginning of Islam, when Ali radiallahu anh and Muawiyah radiallahu anh, they had a major issue. There was a battle that took place between them. But as soon as it was seen that the enemy are becoming desirous of launching their attack on the Muslim world, Hazrat Muawiyah radiallahu anh was the one who said to the Christian leader, that if I just hear you thinking of going towards Ali radiallahu anh, you will find my mighty army setting out immediately. In view of a bigger problem, many a time, a minor difference, a difference which might be a very big issue, but at the moment it is something that says, that can't we leave this for a while and try and sort out something bigger? This law of divide and rule was an established principle of the world of the shayateen, for which reason Quran had made indication. Hold on to the rope of Almighty Allah firmly. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا. Try not to divide amongst yourselves. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. He made them into groups. Each one was fighting and arguing with the other. يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. And one was going to be the weakest of all the groups. How the Bani Israel at that time were the weakest. In today's time it is the Muslim that is the weakest. We also fight with each other in such a manner as though we are very strong and mighty. The words that are said against each other, the curses that are given against each other. But so weak we are against the world of kufr. No person has that himmat, that courage to write against the people of kufr, the regime of kufr. That words which one Muslim is ready to hit against another Muslim, but he is not ready to hit it against his kafir masters. He is not ready to hit it against those people who are oppressing in the lands. Palestinians are being killed, butchered. Syrians are being butchered. But that letters which are being written and which are being fired against Muslims, that is not being fired where it's supposed to be fired. Bani Israel would argue amongst themselves, fight amongst themselves. And Fir'aun would regard them as the weakest of the weakest. يُذَبِّحُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ. So weak they were, that when he passed the ruling, that any male that is born must be killed immediately. And every girl that is born will have no haqq to be a free girl. Rather she must be a domestic, she must be a servant, she must be like a slave in the houses of the Qibtis. That's the only purpose of these girls. إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Indeed, Fir'aun's nature was fasad fil ard. Almighty Allah says, وَنُرِيدُ. But we had made an intention, أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. That those people who had been regarded as the weakest in the earth, today the Muslims in the world, when you hear the sentence kicked from pillar to post, we are today أُسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. understood by everyone as a nation with no voice. But when Almighty Allah intends to favor that group, وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً, to make them leaders of mankind, وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ, to destroy the enemy and to leave them, how it happened with the Bani Israel. Surah Al-Qasas was going to give a message. When Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, small group of Muhajirin left Makkah Mukarramah, their possessions were taken away, their houses were taken away. At one time perhaps they were rich, but as they set out they became poor immediately. Such a nation, ustud'ifu fil ardi, who were regarded so weak, they had no say in Makkah Mukarramah. 8 years later, they would come back into Makkah Mukarramah as the leaders. Not only the leaders of Makkah Mukarramah, the Khilafat would hit the lands of Sham, the lands of Persia, the lands of Abyssinia. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh would be the Khalifa of the world. Umar radiallahu anh, Khalifa of the world. Usman radiallahu anh, Ali radiallahu anh, Muawiyah radiallahu anh. A nation who just the other day had been regarded as so weak that they could not loudly speak out what they wanted. They had to leave their own land. They had to leave their own house. They had no haqq over their own house. But when Almighty Allah's intention of favoring came, then in 8 years, how the entire thing changed. وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, it was our intention to now give them qudrat, power over the earth, and to show Fir'aun and Haman, and the armies of Fir'aun and Haman, مِنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَحْذَرُونَ, that thing that they were living in fear about. As Fir'aun, he knew very well of the birth of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, and he went out of his way to ensure that Musa alayhi salam is not born. Others around would wonder, what is this issue of killing? In every house a child is being killed. His own party, the ministers of his own, even later on said to him that a time will come that there will be a lot of girls to do our work, but there will be no boys. And there are much work that we need boys to do it, not girls. Finally they decided that in 1 year, because his nujumi, his astrologers said to him, Musa alayhi salam will be born in a certain year, meaning either the even year or the odd year, whatever it was. So they decided on the year that he can't be born. On that year, if a child is born, we will leave him. A boy is born. Otherwise we will kill if he's born in the other year. People in his party could not understand what is the purpose of such killing, such madness. But Fir'aun and the people who were close understood very well that if this boy is going to be born, minhum ma kanu yahdharun, that which they feared must not happen was going to happen. At present times today, when we speak of the coming of Sayyiduna al-Mahdi radiyallahu an, it should not be thought, no one should ever feel that the enemy do not know how we are anticipating and waiting for him. They are fearing him. How Fir'aun feared and he went out of his way to establish systems to make sure this boy is not born. They also having their systems. Many of the laws that we are going through presently and laws that we might see after, to be able to pick up every single person, to have the identity of everyone, to know the movement of every individual, to know who is born, where he is born, in which ilaqa, in which area he is born. So much of effort is being made so that the Mahdi doesn't see the sun of this world. But as Almighty Allah made it, that Musa alayhi salatu wassalam was not just going to be born, he was not just going to be growing up, he was going to grow up in the very palace of Fir'aun. Who knows if Almighty Allah's system with the Mahdi will be something similar, that the very regime that will go out of their way to ensure that this boy does not see the light of the sun, who knows if Almighty Allah will allow, will make it such that he will grow up under their noses, he will grow up in their very palace, and they will remain completely unaware. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَى, we sent a message to the mother of Musa alayhi salam, that breastfeed your child, meaning have no fear, because when the decision of Allah is made, nothing is going to happen. فَإِذَا خِفْتِ عَلَيْهِ فَأَلْقِيهِ فِي الْيَمِّ وَلَا تَخَافِي وَلَا تَحْزَنِي. And if that fear grabs you too much, every time when you are breastfeeding him, you know someone might spy. There were spies all around. People were paid. People were paid to speak about the news of a child born in any house. In the books of Tafasir, many incidents are given of how many times Musa alayhi salam, as an infant in the hands of his mother, came close to death. From the time he was just delivered until the time that the mother placed him in a box and put him in the water, she was living in that fear. Almighty Allah said, you can breastfeed him and have no fear. But if the fear does come over, it's a natural fear, then no problem, hand him over to the waters. وَلَا تَخَافِي وَلَا تَحْزَنِي إِنَّا رَادُّوهُ إِلَيْكِ. We will definitely send him back to you. وَجَاعِلُوهُ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And we will make him from those that have been sent from Almighty Allah. As Musa alayhi salam went in the waters, he could have been taken to any island where he could have grown up in secrecy without any of the army of Fir'aun knowing. Almighty Allah was going to make izhar of His qudrat as a message for the world. When the decision of Allah comes, you can be in the den of the lion. If Almighty Allah does not allow, the lion cannot attack. فَالْتَقَطَهُ آلُ فِرْعَوْنَ. The family, the army of Fir'aun, the family of Fir'aun lifted him up. The books of tafsir speak about as Musa alayhi salam's box was going down the waters. Fir'aun and his wife and his child would not have been there. There was no need for them to be at the shores of that dam or that waters. The books of tafsir explained that this girl, the daughter of Fir'aun, she developed a certain rash on her skin. And the hakims, the doctors advised that that water that will be used from that particular waters will help greatly in treating this malady, the sickness. For that purpose, Fir'aun and his army and his family went there to spend a few days. As they were sitting at the shores, looking at the waters, Almighty Allah brought them so close to Musa alayhi salam. Had Almighty Allah wanted, they would not have been there. Had Almighty Allah wanted, they would not have seen the box, but Allah wanted it to happen. The eye would fall on the box. People would be sent to bring it in. It would be opened up in front of Fir'aun. Inna Fir'aun. They picked it up. Luqta is that you find something moving around. As they picked it up, لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًّا وَحَزَنًا. The result of their picking it up was that he was going to become for them now their biggest enemy and the source of their greatest grief. Inna Fir'aun wa Haman wa junudahuma kanu khati'in. No matter how much of plans they had, how much of intelligence, Haman was his senior minister. When you speak of Haman, you say the side aid of Fir'aun, the intelligence of Fir'aun, and their entire armies, all of them were in complete error. All their intelligence could not stop the birth of Musa alayhi salatu wassalam. The wife of Fir'aun, Asiya, falls in love with Musa alayhi salam. Upon her eye falling, she says, قُرَّةُ عَيْنِ لِي وَلَكَ. The beauty of my eye, the coolness of my eye, do not kill him. And Fir'aun is unable to lift up a finger. That Fir'aun whose voice was so loud in the world, whose on one voice hundreds and thousands could be killed. But when Almighty Allah would not allow, the child which was in his hand could not be killed. Musa alayhi salam is taken into the palace. وَحَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَرَاضِعَ مِنْ قَبْلُ. Different women are brought. A small child is craving for milk. Almighty Allah said, we made the milking maids, the breastfeeding woman, we made all of them haram upon him. Musa alayhi salam would not drink. No matter how pure the woman was, how clean her milk was, how she would cuddle him and hold him and fondle him, Musa alayhi salam was not going to take any sip of milk. He was just going to cry and cry and cry. The entire palace was going to be put in wahuznan. That was the beginning of their parishani, the beginning of their worry, the beginning of their sorrow. Until the daughter, the sister of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, she comes and she says, Hal adullukum ala ahli bayti. I know of a certain woman, yakfulunahu lakum. They will look after this child very well. This child will definitely accept the milk of that woman. فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ. The mother of Musa alayhi salam is brought. He grabs onto her immediately and starts suckling. It creates some doubt in them also, that why is he only drinking from this woman? But Almighty Allah would not even allow that doubt to go any further. She would give one answer and would silence all of them, because at that moment they were looking for someone to keep Musa alayhi salam quiet. They were not going to make too much of investigation. Fir'aun would say to the woman, how is he drinking so nicely from you? She said, all children drink from me so nicely. That answer was not the best of answers, but when Almighty Allah clouds the minds of the enemy, even simple answers are more than sufficient. Then she is told to stay in the palace. She says, I cannot do that. I have my own children, my own family to look after. I want to go back to my village. If you all want, I will take the child with me. فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ. And in this manner we returned him to his mother. كَيْ تَقَرَّ عَيْنُهَا. So that her eye may be cooled. وَلَا تَحْزَنَ. Now she would live without any worry. She would have no fear any day of any soldier coming. وَلِتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. And so that she may know that the promise of Almighty Allah is indeed the truth. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. The problem is majority of people do not understand this. In the manner that Musa alayhi salam was going to grow up, in a similar manner, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as long as he was in Makkah Mukarramah, no matter how much they tried to harm him, they were unable to harm him. What they tried to do against him, they could not do it. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam grows up as a prince now in the palace of Fir'aun. As we mentioned, then the incident happens that he kills, mistakenly it was, but for the people of Fir'aun, it was a major crime. A conference is called immediately, and in the conference is decided that Musa alayhi salam, he has now gone beyond the borders. Although he is a prince in this year, but he has committed a crime that cannot be forgiven. وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ يَسْعَى. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he did not have any spy who was sitting in that conference, who was there listening to what decision was being made. But when Almighty Allah wants to save His selected servants, it was put in the heart of one of the people sitting there, that Musa alayhi salam cannot just be killed like this. He would come rushing to Musa alayhi salam. Before the soldiers could find him, he would say, Ya Musa, innal mala'a ya'tamiruna bika. The people of the court have already made a decision. A conspiracy is being hatched against you. They are not even going to give you a chance to speak in the court. You will be found guilty without even being given a chance to mention your side of the story. They are making a plot. They have hatched a conspiracy against you, liyaqtuluka, so that they may kill you. Fakhruj. So my advice to you now is to not stay a day extra in this place. Inni laka minan nasihin. Indeed, I am a well-wisher for you. Where this individual came from, Musa alayhi salam perhaps would not even know what made him come, put his life at stake for Musa alayhi salam. If Fir'aun had to find out later on who gave the message, who warned Musa alayhi salam, what made this person sacrifice himself, no one will ever know. In this manner, Almighty Allah, when He wants to protect His selected servants, there will always be people in this ummah. Almighty Allah will put such sincerity in their hearts that even if they know that their lives will have to be sacrificed, they know that they will be killed, they will be tortured, but for the sake of the deen of Almighty Allah, they are ready for that also. The world has seen enough examples of it, and we will continue seeing examples of that. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he leaves immediately. He does not even know where to go. Almighty Allah directs him. Almighty Allah guides him, and he lands up in the lands of Madyan. He lands up in a land where he knows no one, and no one knows him. There is not a house that he can go to. He reaches a place, وَلَمَّا تَوَجَّهَ تِلْقَاءَ مَدْيَنَ. It was known that in Madyan, the hand of Fir'aun does not reach. His authority was not reaching there. That was all. So Musa alayhi salam, when he lands, he finds وَلَمَّا وَرَدَ مَاءَ مَدْيَنَ وَجَدَ عَلَيْهِ أُمَّةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ يَسْقُونَ. When he comes there, he finds the people are drawing water. He is also thirsty. He is extremely tired. He has been covered with fear from the beginning of the journey till the ending. He had to go through so many posts. The armies of Fir'aun were on so many lookout points. How Allah Tabarak Ta'ala protected him. It's very easy to say he reached Madyan, but if someone tries to trace that journey from the land of where he was in Egypt to get to the land of Madyan, how many lookout points, posts of the Egyptians he had to pass. One person with so many soldiers looking for him. But when Almighty Allah wants His servant to become invisible to the eyes of the enemy, He goes through them, as Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to make the hijrat from Makkah Mukarramah to Medina Munawwara. He was ordered to make the hijrat at the time where the enemies surrounded the house. As Musa alayhi salam had to make his hijrat when the enemy were all looking for him. Had it been, he could have gone before this, but Almighty Allah wanted to make izhar of His qudrat. When the enemy surrounded the house, that is when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ordered, now you will leave. taking a handful of sand. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam even throws it. They find some sand hitting the eye. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam reads, وَجَعَلْنَا مِن بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سَدًّا فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. We have placed a barrier in front of them, behind them. We have covered their eyes, they cannot see. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes past them. Later on, someone will come and ask, what are you all doing standing here? They are saying, we're waiting for the opportunity to attack the house. He will leave his room just now. We will launch the attack. The person says, but did you not see? A while ago I saw him walking past all of y'all. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to become invisible to them. The trackers would be sent to find him. Again they would surround the cave in which he was. Right at the cave they are. One is saying, let's go in the cave. The other is saying, he cannot be in this cave. Almighty Allah made all of this happen to show that he is not in need at all of the help of the world for the protection of his deen. One Musa alayhi salatu wasalam would remain without a scratch. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would make the journey of hijrat without a scratch. When the time of the Mahdi comes, Allah tabarak ta'ala will make it that his birth, his growing up, his upbringing, everything will happen at a time when every enemy is looking for him. But it will happen without a scratch coming to his body. Musa alayhi salam is lonely. He is without food. He is without shelter. He is without company. When Almighty Allah makes a decision, food, shelter, company, everything comes looking for the individual. He does not have to look for it himself. Musa alayhi salam sees two girls. They are waiting for everybody else. He says to them, what is wrong that you all have to come and fetch water? This is the job of a man. They will say, Abuna Shaykhun Kabir. Our father is now very old. There is no male at the house, and perhaps they did not have the ability, or no one was ready to work for them as a khadim, as a servant. Musa alayhi salam takes pity on these two girls, and he himself will go and draw water for them. It would be a great favor when they reach home. Their father would be amazed that how early you all have come today compared to normal times. They will explain to him. The father will send one of them, go and call this boy. When Musa alayhi salam reaches, فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ وَقَصَّ عَلَيْهِ الْقَصَصِ قَالَ لَا تَخَفْ. He will say, have no fear. نَجَوْتَ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. You have been protected. Musa alayhi salam would not only find a loving elder in the house from who he would learn many lessons, but this man would become his father-in-law. Musa alayhi salam will find an accommodating household. He will find a companion. He will find food. He will become an aid to them. They were looking for some young person, strong person to help him. They would be an aid for him. Just a few days before, Musa alayhi salam had no thought at all that such arrangements would be made. When Almighty Allah's decision is made, he left the lands of Egypt with absolutely nothing, not knowing where to go, not knowing who to ask for help. Almighty Allah's selected servants are like that. At a time when no one in the world can understand where their help will come from, Almighty Allah makes indeed a most amazing arrangements, and the people gather around. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he left Makkah Mukarramah, the thought of Medina Munawwara, that how will those people give their hearts over? It was not normal with the Arabs to look after someone who was not of their tribe. They wouldn't sacrifice their lives, their children, their family for someone who was out of the tribe. Here a stranger was going. Not only he was looking for help, but he was walking into the tribe with the intention of taking over the tribe. That the crown of kingship now has to be put on his hand. This was something the Arabs had never done. If somebody else entered, they might look after him as a stranger. But dare he lay his hand on the authority, on the leadership of the town, they would kill him immediately. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he reaches Medina Munawwara, as Musa alayhi salam found a household, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam found a household. They gave him their lives. They gave him their wealth. They treated him as a father treats a son, as a son treats a father. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam found a most unique life. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was told by the father-in-law that if you will stay here for 8 years, and if you make it an extra 2 years, indeed it will be a favor from your side. Amazing it was when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after 8 years, was going to come the conquest of Makkah Mukarramah. Until that time, he needed to stay in Medina Munawwara. After the conquest of Makkah Mukarramah, the Ansar were worried that will Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam now stay in Makkah Mukarramah, or will he come back with us to Medina Munawwara? Now there was no compulsion. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam could stay in Makkah Mukarramah. Nabi Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, however, as he was going to fulfill 10 years, فَإِنْ أَتْمَمْتَ عَشْرًا مِنْ عِنْدِكَ, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was also going to fulfill his 10 years by the people of Medina Munawwara. As for the era of Sayyidina or Hazrat Sayyidina al-Masih radiyallahu an, what comes in the narrations is before the coming of Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wassalam, there will also be a period of about 7 to 10 years, between 7 meaning 8 to 10 years, in which he will be fighting this battle before the coming of Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wassalam. Almighty Allah, in His unique wisdom, He creates great similarities between the selected servants of Almighty Allah. Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, after finding or fulfilling his time of 10 years, the mission of Musa alayhi salatu wassalam was now only going to start. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, after he fulfilled his mission of 10 years, his mission also, where many a person will say that isn't that the end of his mission, he now passed away. Rather it was the beginning of the mission, with the spreading of the Khilafat and the spreading of the Muslims' army. The nur of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was only now going to start spreading into the lands of the Fir'auns. It was going to enter the lands of the Persians, the land of the Romans, the land of the Abyssinians. It was going to go into the court of every zalim of the time, and it was going to bring them down, as Musa alayhi salatu wassalam's nur was going to bring down the regime of the Pharaoh. Sayyiduna al-Mahdi also, as his effort will be made, it will bring down 7 to 10 years will be of his effort, and then it will come the time of Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wassalam. That is when the nur of the Mahdi and Isa alayhi salam will combine, and it will hit the entire world. It will bring down the regime of Kufr, the regime of the Jewish world. It will bring an end to the fitan of Dajjal. It is that date that we wait for. That is the time when our eyes will become cool. As the mother of Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ, Almighty Allah says how we sent him back to his mother so that her eyes can become cool and she can understand that the wa'da of Allah is indeed the truth. We also make dua that Almighty Allah allow our eyes to become cool, and that we also see the promise of Almighty Allah fulfilled in the most unique manners. Allah Tabarak Ta'ala in detail then speaks about how Musa alayhi salam would go back to the court of Fir'aun, how he would challenge Fir'aun. Fir'aun would have no answer. Time and again he would try to harm Musa alayhi salam or the Bani Israel, but he would not manage at all. Almighty Allah speaks about Fir'aun, and one is, Inna Qaruna kana min qawmi Musa. There was Qarun, he was from the family or from the tribe of Musa alayhi salam, min qawmi Musa, fabagha alayhim. If you want to have a word for him, what we will call today the spies, or you might call them the puppet governments. He was a man from the Bani Israel, and he was put in charge to make sure the Bani Israel do not do anything which makes Fir'aun upset. He was the inner fitna. He was the munafiq from within, the hypocrite. He was the puppet government on top of the Bani Israel. As Fir'aun had him, in the era that we live today, the shaitani world also has many Qaruns to ensure that the deen of Almighty Allah does not stand up, to ensure that the Mahdi does not rise, to ensure that an Islamic revolution does not take place. But as Qarun, as Haman, as Fir'aun, none of them could stop it. Where Fir'aun was going to be destroyed, these puppets were also going to be destroyed. Almighty Allah speaks about the destruction of Qarun finally. فَخَسَفْنَا بِهِ وَبِدَارِهِ الْأَرْضِ. When the earth grabbed him and all that wealth that he had attained, Almighty Allah speaks in detail about his wealth. His wealth was such that just carrying the keys of his wealth would make an army tired. He used to get a lot of wealth from Fir'aun in payment for his loyalty, in payment for his spying, in payment for his evil against the Bani Israel. He would see them bleeding despite being his own family. But as long as he was getting paid by the evil regime above him, in the world of puppet governments we have today, they also enjoyed the wealth of a regime above them, living in their luxuries, in their boats, in their yachts, in their palaces, knowing that their own people are being slaughtered, butchered, killed, tortured in the prisons, sometimes at their very own hands. But as Qarun, a time was going to come where he would be slaughtered, swallowed in the earth, and everything that he had taken will be slaughtered. At that time, the people who used to look at Qarun before, and used to say how lucky this individual is, look at him, he's from the Bani Israel, But what a master he is. وَأَصْبَحَ الَّذِينَ تَمَنَّوْا مَكَانَهُ. Almighty Allah says, when they saw how the earth swallowed him, those very people who just yesterday were saying how wonderful is the life of Qarun, they began saying, وَيْكَأَنَّ اللَّهِ. They said, indeed it is that Allah gives to who He wants and Allah takes away from who He wants. لَوْلَا أَمَّنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. Had Allah not been kind to us, لَخَسَفَ بِنَا. We would also have been grabbed by the earth and taken. The regimes that we have above us, they make this offer to many Muslims in the world to become a sellout, to sell their loyalty, to sell their deen for a little bit of this world. There will be those people who will become a Qarun, and a day will come when the earth will swallow him as it swallowed Qarun. And there will be those people who will say, I'll never sell out my deen. Finally, Allah Tabarak Ta'ala says at the end of the surah, Man ja'a bil hasanati, the muqabala of haqq and batil, of a Musa and a Fir'aun. Man ja'a bil hasana, the one who will come with good, falahu khayrun minha, he will find by Almighty Allah something even better. وَمَنْ جَاءَ بِالسَّيِّئَةِ, and the one who will bring evil, فَلَا يُجْزَى الَّذِينَ عَمِلُوا السَّيِّئَاتِ, then what do they think Allah will give them except the reward, the punishment of the evil they have brought? إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنِ, indeed that Allah who sent the Qur'an upon you, لَرَادُكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ, He will definitely bring you back to the place that He has promised. Islam has been promised a very high place and a position. It is that position that we are making dua for and waiting, when Islam again will stand on that position and it will bring justice back into the entire world. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.